Welcome to the Deep Dive. We have some, well, truly fascinating source material in front of us today. It's an excerpt from a book called The Legend Mind, Zero to Infinity.
Mm.
And it's authored by the SKR, that's Sonu Kumar. It promises, and I think it delivers, a really comprehensive look at things like success, governance, but from an incredibly wide lens.
It's a really extraordinary text. I mean, the reason it's so unique is that it intentionally takes this intense, interdisciplinary approach.
It really does.
It just moves so seamlessly between, science, math, physics, cosmology, and then it weaves in religious idioms. The whole thing is dedicated to the author's immortal guru, Lord Shiva.
And that grounding, that spiritual and philosophical core, seems absolutely critical, doesn't it? Because it feels like it changes the entire time frame he's applying to economic thought.
It absolutely does. It's rooted in this desire to achieve what he calls zero attraction of the world, which basically means you're not thinking in terms of quarterly profits or four-year election cycles. You're thinking in generations, centuries even.
I can see why the author called this an eye-opener. That approach, it just sets a completely unique tone for the whole analysis. And our focus for this deep dive is chapter 32.
Right.
And this chapter sits inside a larger unit describing what the author calls the 5 diamonds of nations.
Which are constitution, kids, youth, population, and nature. Pretty interesting list.
It is. And
Yeah.
chapter 32 singles out population,
Yeah.
and it explicitly challenges pretty much every traditional economic measure you can think of. It's really asking you, the listener, to completely reconsider what makes a nation wealthy.
And the core thesis is so direct, but it's completely provocative. It's just population as money of nations.
Right.
It treats people not just as, consumers or voters or a workforce, but as the ultimate dynamic asset on a nation's balance sheet.
Okay, so let's really unpack this, because when the text argues that population is the true currency, that it literally acts as money,
Yeah,
that fundamentally changes the entire calculus of how you govern.
it changes everything.
So today we're going to dive into how this source defines human capital. When a population flips from being an asset to a geopolitical liability, and what specific policies are needed to make people appreciate, literally, like currency.
Yeah.
This is, I think, more than just a deep dive. It feels like we're exploring a new philosophy of governance.
And to really set the stage for that, we should probably touch on the author's defining acronym, the one that frames his whole worldview. Legend.
Ah, yes. It's quite dramatic.
It is. It stands for legacy, even God and not demons.
It's even God and not demons.
And, this isn't just poetic language, it's an economic imperative. If your goal as a leader is to build a legacy, something so enduring that even God respects it, and demons, which he defines as corruption, internal conflict, short-term thinking.
Right. The stuff that eats nations from the inside out.
Exactly. If those things end not your legacy, it means your governance has to transcend those short election cycles.
Yeah.
It forces you to focus on multi-generational investments. And that immediately justifies prioritizing the long-term appreciation of your people over, say, short-term fiscal gains.
That's a really crucial interpretation. It shifts the entire discussion from, quarterly reports and stock market fluctuations to centuries of strategic planning. So with that framework in mind, let's treat this deep dive as an intellectual quest to see how this eternal legacy is built on the very people a nation governs. Let's start with the baseline, the traditional view. In the lexicon of economics and statecraft, national wealth has always been measured in tangible things. Things you can count, things you can touch. We think of reserves, mines, factories.
Right.
What does that traditional lexicon tell us defines a wealthy nation?
Traditionally, for centuries, power and wealth were just synonymous with tangible control. When a nation assessed its own worth, it looked at what was physically there, what was easily quantifiable on an accounting sheet.
Like gold bars in a vault.
Literally, gold bars in a vault, the gold reserves, the foreign exchange they control to manage global trade, the extent of their natural resources, oil, minerals, timber, the quality and reach of their physical infrastructure, their roads, their ports, their power grids.
And of course, the big one, GDP.
And of course, the gross domestic product. That's the primary measure we've used for decades to gauge annual economic activity. It's all about output.
But here's where the legend mind really gets interesting. The text argues that while all those assets, the gold, the oil, the GDP, were absolutely critical for the 19th and 20th centuries.
The industrial era.
Exactly. The era of industrial empires and resource wars.
Mm.
It argues they're just no longer the ultimate metric for enduring national strength here in the 21st century.
Precisely. And the argument is that the global economy has gone through this fundamental transformation. We're now in an increasingly knowledge-driven, service-oriented world. And in this new arena, the text states unequivocally that a nation's most valuable and, crucially, its most dynamic asset is its people.
That one shift in perspective,
Yeah.
it changes everything.
It really does. Moving from physical assets to human assets changes everything about how a government should prioritize its spending and its long-term strategy.
Okay, so let's dig into that core argument. The chapter insists population isn't just a demographic statistic, it is currency. But wait a minute. My first thought, and I'm sure for many listeners too, is that a massive population is almost always seen as a strain on resources first, right? A liability that needs infrastructure, food, water. So how does the text immediately flip that initial skeptical perception?
And that's a critical challenge this chapter takes on headfirst. It fully acknowledges that an unmanaged population is a massive strain, but it insists that a managed population is liquid, appreciating wealth.
Liquid. That's a fascinating choice of words.
Think about that word choice. Currency. What does currency imply? It implies liquidity, a medium of exchange, a store of wealth. It demands that a state view a citizen not just as a consumer or laborer, but as a unit of national wealth that's capable of exponential growth through skills, ideas, and innovation. So the government's job isn't just managing resources anymore, it's managing potential.
So let's look at the return on that potential, which the text calls the positive investment. When it's strategically nurtured, educated, healthy, and empowered, the population becomes the engine of, well, everything. Innovation, productivity, resilience, cultural influence.
This is that stewardship mindset in action. If the government treats its people like a high-yield investment portfolio, I mean, really investing heavily in their development, the population drives the nation forward in every conceivable way.
Which means you're less reliant on outsiders.
You're less reliant on external sources for innovation or for capital. And the source really emphasizes the word resilience here. It means the ability to adapt to global crises, to technological disruption, to geopolitical shifts, because your base talent pool is high quality and it's versatile. It becomes a self-sustaining engine of growth.
And on the flip side, the source defines the negative risk with this real sense of urgency. When this asset is mismanaged or neglected, it depreciates rapidly and can become a significant liability.
And that's the other side of the coin. When citizens are uneducated, unhealthy, disenfranchised, they stop being productive units of capital. They become fiscal drains. They strain public systems. They fuel social friction, and they slow innovation to a crawl. The population moves from an appreciating asset to a high-risk, high-cost liability.
So if we connect this all back to the bigger picture, to that legend framework we talked about, this chapter is essentially redefining human capital as the absolute cornerstone of modern state wealth. And it requires what you called a stewardship mindset.
A stewardship mindset is the total antithesis of short-term political gain. A steward doesn't manage an estate for a quick sale. They manage it for long-term health, for perpetual prosperity. So the government's primary responsibility in this view becomes the careful cultivation of its citizens. Every major policy decision, from schooling to healthcare to institutional integrity, has to be viewed through the lens of maximizing human potential and thereby appreciating the national currency.
So it forces us to move beyond just counting heads.
Exactly. It forces us to move beyond simple demographic counts and look at the quality and the activation rate of the people. And this focus on quality over sheer quantity, that is the fundamental shift.
So to turn that raw population, the raw numbers, into real productive capacity, we need foundational investments. The text, it cites some established economists, people like Gary Becker and Theodore Schultz, who really popularized this whole concept of human capital. They reframed individuals as investments, not costs. For listeners who might know the name, but not the, the depth of the idea, what did Becker and Schultz actually establish that makes this concept so revolutionary?
Well, this is the theoretical bridge that connects the philosophy to the economics. Gary Becker, who was a Nobel laureate, he fundamentally shifted economic thought by arguing that all this spending on education, on training, on medical care, It's not just social spending.
Right. It's not just a cost center on the budget.
Exactly. It's an investment in human capital. They are capital expenditures that yield real monetary returns, just like investing in a new factory or new infrastructure or intellectual property. And Theodore Schultz echoed this. He emphasized that the true wealth of nations isn't measured by their physical resources, but by the skills and the knowledge embodied in their people. The Legend Mine uses this framework to argue that strategically applied resources, education, health, skills, social cohesion, they transform that raw demographic potential into verifiable production capacity.
And the source breaks this investment strategy down into 3 critical pillars.
Yeah.
Let's start with the first one, Pillar A, education as infrastructure. I think the analogy used here is it's particularly powerful for a deep dive like this.
Oh, it's brilliant. It's brilliant because it makes an abstract idea totally concrete. The entire education system, schools, universities, technical training centers, it's compared directly to physical infrastructure like roads and ports and fiber optic cables.
How so?
Well, the logic is perfectly parallel. Roads facilitate the physical movement of goods and trade, right? They create market efficiency. Schools and universities, in the same way, facilitate cognitive and creative output. They create intellectual efficiency. If you don't have high-quality education, the flow of ideas, innovation, and skilled labor within your nation just slows down to a trickle, just like chronic traffic congestion slows down physical trade. It's a bottleneck on your nation's currency flow.
And the source gives some specific examples of how nations have leveraged this investment to great strategic effect. It mentions South Korea and Finland, 2 very different countries, but they both used highly skilled, educated populations to leapfrog development stages.
They are prime examples of the idea that the quality of your population is far more important than the quantity. I mean, look at South Korea. Starting in the 1950s, after the Korean War, they had virtually nothing. No natural resources, no industrial base.
And were devastated.
Completely. Their strategic decision was radical. Universal investment in human capital. They went all in on STEM fields and vocational training. And this highly educated, highly disciplined workforce was the specific mechanism that allowed them to go from a developing nation to a global leader in high-tech manufacturing and consumer electronics in just 2 generations. They essentially turned their population into intellectual raw material.
And what about Finland? Their approach is often held up as a model for educational excellence, not just rapid growth.
Finland demonstrated something slightly different, but just as powerful. They showed that by prioritizing teacher quality, critical thinking, and student well-being over, say, rote memorization and standardized tests.
Which is what a lot of systems do.
It is. But by avoiding that, they created a robust, adaptable, and highly resilient workforce. They prioritized depth over breadth. And the result is a population that can pivot quickly, turning its intellectual capacity into national resilience and steady economic prosperity. They consistently outperform much larger nations that are still relying primarily on resource extraction.
Okay, let's move to the second pillar. Pillar B, health is productivity. The economic rationale here is just. It's starkly pragmatic. It moves beyond the ethical argument for healthcare and frames it as a direct generator of wealth.
Right. A healthy population is just inherently more productive, more innovative, and more entrepreneurial. Sickness creates this massive, sustained drag on any economy. When people are unhealthy, they can't work consistently, their capacity for learning and innovation is diminished, and they require costly, reactive public services.
And the source provides a really powerful data point to back this up, referencing a World Health Organization estimate.
It's an incredible statistic. Every $1 invested in public health yields up to $21 in economic returns.
$21. That multiplier sounds almost unbelievable. For anyone listening, how does the mechanism behind that kind of return actually work? I mean, that has to make incredible political commitment, surely.
It absolutely takes long-term political commitment, which, brings us right back to that Legend framework. You need policies that last for decades, not just a single 4-year term.
So how does it compound like that?
The multiplier works because the investment is highly preventative. Spending on things like vaccines, clean water, nutritional education, it prevents incredibly expensive acute care down the line. When people are healthy, they avoid the chronic diseases that lead to years, sometimes decades, of lost productivity. The reduction in sick days, the ability for children to learn more effectively in school, and the capacity for workers to remain economically active far longer into old age. All of that just compounds over time.
So the implication is clear. Healthy citizens work longer, they learn better, and they reduce the burden on public systems. It's just rational economics, not just ethics.
Precisely. If your population currency is healthy, it's capable of sustained high-level productivity. It reduces the national fiscal load. It's basically an investment in resilience against pandemics and long-term societal stability.
And finally, Pillar C, the demographic dividend. Now, this is a concept you hear about a lot in the news, but I think it's frequently misunderstood. Let's get the precise definition here.
The dividend concept describes a very specific, time-limited window of opportunity for accelerated economic growth. This happens when a country has a large working-age population relative to its dependents.
Meaning fewer children and elderly people to support.
Exactly. A significantly smaller proportion of non-workers. So for a period of, say, 30 to 50 years, you have this disproportionately large pool of income earners and taxpayers supporting fewer non-workers. This surge of labor energy provides the raw fuel for a potential economic takeoff.
And the text gives some crucial historical examples of this being leveraged successfully.
It points directly to China's dividend, which spanned roughly from the 1980s to the 2000s. This massive influx of young, productive labor is what powered its explosive manufacturing sector and allowed it to transition into a global economic superpower. And today, the source cites India as being in a similar stage. It has the largest youth population in the world, and therefore this immense potential working age demographic.
But, and this is a big, but the source is very careful to add a crucial caveat. This dividend is not automatic.
No.
You can't just have a lot of young people and assume prosperity is going to follow.
And that might be the most critical insight in the whole chapter. A demographic dividend only pays out if the state makes immediate strategic investments to capture that energy. Specifically, it requires massive, proactive investment in creating meaningful jobs, in targeted education that matches future skills, and in robust governance to make sure opportunities are equitable and efficient.
Because if you don't,
if you have millions of working-age people without jobs or without the right skills, that dividend very quickly turns into a liability. It becomes frustration, social unrest, and a drain on resources. It becomes a ticking demographic time bomb, not a boon. The dividend is a moment of profound national opportunity that has to be seized through policy.
So moving beyond the internal economics, let's look at how this population currency plays out on the global stage. In the 21st century, the source notes that soft power and innovation often outweigh traditional military might in terms of sustainable long-term influence. How does a population project that kind of global power?
This is where we move into the realm of cultural and intellectual projection. National power isn't just about tanks and warships anymore. It's about the ability to influence global tastes, global values, and the direction of technology. And that influence, that flow, comes directly from the creativity, the diversity, the education of the population. It's an asset that crosses borders without needing an army.
The text details cultural export as a major factor in this soft power. What examples are highlighted, and crucially, how can a government strategically support these things? It's not just luck, right?
No, not at all. The source highlights some very clear contemporary examples. We see the global phenomenon of K-pop coming out of South Korea. And this wasn't an accident. The South Korean government recognized that cultural output was a high-yield strategic asset, and they actively invested in its growth. They created infrastructure, provided funding for global promotion, and integrated culture into their foreign policy.
And Bollywood is another example.
Exactly. The massive film industry of Bollywood in India acts as both an economic and a cultural ambassador, exporting Indian narratives and values across Africa, the Middle East, and Asia.
And then, of course, there's Silicon Valley in the U.S.,
which is really the pinnacle of an innovation culture. It's this dynamic ecosystem that was born from a blend of excellent higher education, vast available risk capital, and, critically, a highly liberal immigration system that was designed to attract the world's smartest people. These are all global influences that are linked directly to people and their ideas, not simply to military muscle.
And the role of the diaspora is also highlighted as an extension of that national power.
Yes. The source explains how diasporas function as cultural ambassadors and, just as importantly, as economic bridges. When your skilled or culturally influential citizens move abroad, they carry their nation's identity and values, but they also create trade links, facilitate foreign direct investment, and send remittances back home. The source frames them as literal extensions of the nation's economic and cultural reach, linking the homeland to all the world's major economic hubs.
Okay, next, let's look at innovation ecosystems. The source defines the necessary conditions for these to thrive, and it says diverse, urban, and educated populations are the key ingredients that foster these innovation clusters.
Right, and each of those ingredients is vital. Diversity fosters creativity through the constant collision of different viewpoints and problem-solving techniques. Urban centers provide the necessary density for rapid knowledge transfer and collaboration, the chance meetings in a coffee shop that spark new companies. And as we've already established, education provides the baseline skill level needed for complex, high-value work. These three ingredients combine to create that volatile, high-energy environment where truly disruptive technologies and new business models are born.
And the case study of Israel, the startup nation, is used really powerfully here to demonstrate that necessity and policy, not resources, are what drive innovation.
Israel's success is a textbook case of leveraging human capital in the face of resource scarcity. The text explicitly notes that this success does not stem from vast natural resources.
By very few.
Very few. Instead, it's derived entirely from a highly educated, risk-tolerant population that's been shaped by necessity and by deliberate policy. The unique structure of mandatory military service, for instance, often results in highly skilled, collaborative, and risk-tolerant entrepreneurs who are used to operating under high pressure. It's proof that a nation can generate immense geopolitical and economic value out of pure human ingenuity, treating knowledge itself as the highest form of resource extraction.
Finally, let's touch on labor and military readiness. Even in our increasingly automated world, the source states that strategic sectors still rely entirely on human talent.
The strategic reliance is absolute in critical areas that require judgment, adaptation, and creativity. While automated manufacturing is prevalent, the source is specific that sectors like defense, high-level healthcare, especially diagnostics and surgery advanced engineering, and complex financial analysis are still entirely reliant on irreplaceable human talent.
You can't automate everything.
You can't automate strategic judgment, you can't automate political negotiations or complex medical ethics.
So this means a robust, versatile population is absolutely essential for state sovereignty.
Absolutely. The so what here is that a robust, adaptable population ensures your national security and your economic sovereignty in these critical areas. If a nation can't staff its own complex infrastructure, or design its own defense system, or manage its own sophisticated healthcare needs, it loses autonomy over its own destiny. The strategic value of human capital in this context becomes paramount. It's the ultimate, non-outsourceable asset.
We've spent a lot of time celebrating the appreciating nature of this currency, but the source gives a very sober warning. It's a double-edged sword. What happens when this currency is neglected? The text warns that a population without proper institutions or opportunity can strain resources, fuel unrest, and deepen inequality.
And this is the dynamic tension at the very heart of the argument. Population is volatile. It can appreciate wildly, or it can crash and become a deadweight, creating immense instability. A large population is only an asset if it has the systems and the opportunities there to support it. And the transition from asset to liability can be swift and incredibly painful.
Let's start with liability number one, youth bulges and unemployment. What is the precise risk profile here?
A youth bulge refers to a demographic structure where a very high percentage of the population is young, say under 30. Now, if the surge of young people enters the job market and they lack either the necessary skills or the available employment opportunities, all of that massive demographic energy, which should be driving prosperity, instead leads to profound frustration and social instability. The text is very clear on this. Population without opportunity breeds frustration, not prosperity.
And the geographical examples the source cites. They illustrate this danger tragically, often leading to major political crises.
They point to parts of sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East, regions that have experienced rapid youth population growth. When governments lack the institutional capacity or the economic diversity to absorb these workers into meaningful employment, this large, energetic, and underemployed segment of the population often becomes the driving force behind political upheaval, protests, and even migration crises. These populations don't lack ambition, they lack opportunity, and that makes them highly susceptible to radicalization and political instability.
Then we have liability number two, which is the exact opposite problem, and it's one primarily faced by developed nations, aging societies and public debt. This is the demographic strain that undermines established economies.
Yes, this is the challenge of demographic decline and inversion, what some people call the gray tsunami. It's faced most acutely by Japan and parts of Europe, but it's increasingly a problem for global powers like China as well. They face shrinking workforces at the same time as they have rising dependency ratios.
Which means fewer workers supporting more retirees.
Exactly. Fewer people are working, contributing income tax, and fueling consumer spending, while more elderly individuals are relying on state-provided pensions, sophisticated healthcare, and social care.
And what is the inescapable consequence of this demographic inversion for the national balance sheet?
The source notes that without one of two things, either massive, targeted immigration to replenish the workforce or monumental productivity gains through technology and automation, this demographic shift inevitably slows economic growth and inflates public debt. The burden on the shrinking working population just becomes unsustainable. They have to either pay higher taxes, accept degraded services for their parents and grandparents, or face runaway national indebtedness. The once appreciating currency starts to eat itself.
And finally, liability number 3, brain drain. This is the physical depletion of the national currency, and often it's the highest yield segment of that currency walking out the door.
This is perhaps the most direct and grievous loss of human capital. Brain drain is the emigration of your skilled citizens, your doctors, your engineers, your IT professionals, your entrepreneurs, because of poor governance, endemic corruption, or just a simple lack of opportunity that matches their qualifications. They leave for places where their human capital is valued and can appreciate.
And in economic terms, this isn't just a loss of future potential, it's a loss of a massive prior investment.
Absolutely. And the reflective insight here is critical. The text treats the movement of people identically to capital flight. It's a depletion of the national treasury. When a highly trained doctor or engineer leaves, the nation loses all the public investment it made in their education, and it forfeits decades of their future productivity, their tax revenue, and their innovation. It's like watching your high-yield assets just walk out the door, permanently damaging your capacity for future growth.
And the source provides some specific examples of nations that are struggling with this profound loss.
Haiti, Nigeria, and even parts of Eastern Europe are cited. These are countries that often have high-quality universities that train brilliant professionals, only for those professionals to immediately migrate to North America or Western Europe. This instability and loss of talent weaken the nation's economic prospects and its governance quality, which makes it even harder to solve the problems that caused the emigration in the first place. It's a vicious cycle of depreciation.
So to avoid all those liabilities and really maximize the asset, the source prescribes a set of policies. It's a very proactive mandate, urging governments to adopt that stewardship mindset and invest in people as seriously as they would in financial reserves. This policy section is basically the governance instruction manual for currency appreciation.
Exactly. This is where it moves from the philosophical argument straight into actionable governance. It details the specific mandates required to build a resilient, innovative society and ensure that your human currency holds its value over the long term.
Let's start with Mandate 1, education reform. The text calls for a fundamental shift away from rote learning.
The source calls for a move away from just memorizing facts and standardized outputs, things that can be easily replicated or automated by AI, and toward cultivating critical thinking, digital literacy, creativity, and fostering a culture of lifelong learning. The world changes far too fast for skills you learned only in childhood to suffice. The goal isn't just to produce knowledgeable workers, but adaptable problem solvers.
And this reform needs explicit curriculum alignment with the future, not with the past.
Yes. Curriculums have to be actively aligned with the needs of the future job market, not the job market of 20 years ago. The text specifically mentions emerging fields like AI deployment, green energy technologies, and the complex digital core economy. This prevents the mass production of graduates whose skills are already obsolete the day they enter the workforce, which mitigates that risk of youth unemployment we just discussed.
Mandate 2 covers healthcare access. The dual rationale here, ethics and economics, is key to understanding the investment.
Universal health coverage is framed not merely as an act of compassion, but as an economically rational, preventative investment. An unhealthy workforce is an unproductive workforce, creating long-term fiscal liabilities. By guaranteeing widespread access to preventive and basic care, the government is cutting down on future catastrophic economic costs associated with chronic illness, lost work capacity, and early mortality. It's an insurance policy for the national currency.
And where should the investment focus be to achieve that maximum return, that 21-to-1 ratio we talked about?
The emphasis is heavily on the preventative side, stopping illness before it starts. This includes aggressive public health campaigns, mental health support, which is critical for sustained high-level cognitive output, and maternal health, to ensure the next generation of human capital starts life on the strongest possible physical and intellectual footing. These are the low-cost, high-return investments that demonstrate true stewardship.
Mandate 3 is gender equity. The economic upside here is immediately clear from the source. Empowering women effectively doubles your talent pool.
It's just simple math. Historically, when a nation restricts half of its population from reaching their full productive capacity, they are intentionally operating at 50% efficiency. Removing the legal, cultural, and institutional barriers in education and employment is the most straightforward, highest impact way to appreciate your national currency almost overnight. The text stresses that this isn't just about fairness, it's about eliminating self-imposed economic waste.
And the source provides clear evidence of this policy's success.
Countries that successfully close gender gaps in education and employment consistently see higher GDP growth, greater social stability, and better governance. The source specifically cites Rwanda and the Nordic nations as prime examples of states that have successfully harnessed the full potential of their female population, which has resulted in broad economic stability, innovation, and stronger societal resilience.
Mandate 4 addresses inclusive institutions. This is about making sure the national currency, the talent, flows freely and fairly without being skimmed off the top.
And this raises an important question that every good strategist has to ask. How do you ensure that the human capital you've so carefully invested in, these talented, educated individuals, is actually used efficiently and not just wasted or exiled?
And the solution involves building robust social and legal structures that guarantee opportunity for everyone.
You have to build trust in government. You have to rigorously enforce the rule of law without exception. And you have to guarantee social mobility so that talent rises regardless of family connections or wealth. Corruption and inequality are explicitly identified as the mechanisms that waste human potential. Corruption acts as a severe, non-productive tax on ambition and innovation, effectively devaluing your human currency because people who excel can't get ahead without paying bribes or conforming to a broken system. If citizens don't trust the systems, they won't invest their own energy and resources into the national project.
And finally, Mandate 5, smart immigration. This is framed as a strategic tool for maintaining a healthy, high-yield population balance.
This is about using strategy to proactively attract and integrate high-quality human capital from abroad. The source advocates for using highly selective, point-based systems to deliberately attract talent whose skills fill specific high-value gaps in your national economy, or to offset the demographic challenges of an aging society. This ensures a continuous injection of fresh, high-yield human capital.
What case studies illustrate the successful application of this kind of talent curation strategy?
Canada and Australia are excellent examples. They use merit and point-based systems precisely to fuel innovation and offset demographic decline. They are, in essence, curating their population currency by selecting for skills, education, and language proficiency, ensuring they remain competitive globally and replenish their strategic talent sectors year after year.
So as we look to the future, as artificial intelligence fundamentally reshapes the nature of work, the source is clear. The nature of human capital itself must evolve drastically. The currency of the future won't be manual labor or repetitive tasks, because machines can handle those. What will the highest value human capital be, according to the Legend Mind?
This is really the forward-looking climax of the chapter, and it argues that the highest value will reside in uniquely human characteristics, traits that are difficult, if not impossible, for current technology to replicate. The focus shifts to what the source calls the new human traits: adaptable intelligence, emotional intelligence, or EQ, and ethical judgment.
Adaptable intelligence being about rapid learning and pivoting, and EQ being vital for collaboration and leadership in complex environments.
Exactly. Adaptability ensures you remain relevant when your entire job role might be automated away every few years. EQ is essential for managing diverse, distributed teams and dealing with complex client relationships, areas where empathy and nuance are paramount. But ethical judgment is perhaps the most crucial currency of all in an AI age. As AI makes more and more high-stakes decisions in medicine, in defense, in finance, the human supervisors, the programmers, the policymakers, they must ensure these systems align with deep human values and legal frameworks. The capacity for nuance, empathy, and moral reasoning becomes the highest value currency in a machine-driven world.
And this shift necessitates the development of lifelong learning economies, which have to be supported by nations.
Continuous reskilling and upskilling must be supported by nations as a fundamental economic requirement. The necessity for people to update their skills every 5 to 10 years places this immense recurring burden on the individual, which the state has to mitigate through active policy intervention. If your human currency is going to appreciate, it has to be continuously polished.
The model example here, Singapore's Skills Future initiative, offers a clear path for this kind of active population investment.
It's a perfect model. The initiative offers citizens individual credits for lifelong education and training. It effectively views continuous learning not as a private expense, but as a public good and a strategic national investment. It acknowledges that the government has a vested interest in ensuring its citizens remain technologically relevant and productive throughout their working lives, which shields the entire economy from mass technological obsolescence.
Next is human-centric innovation. Technology is often viewed as this inevitable threat to labor, but the source suggests a proactive and very different approach.
The policy goal here is critical. Technology should augment, not displace, human potential. Governments must implement policies, things like tax incentives, regulatory frameworks, that prioritize using AI as a tool to enhance human productivity, allowing skilled workers to achieve more, rather than policies that simply encourage replacing workers to cut costs. Unmanaged mass displacement, the text warns, is a rapid devaluation of the human currency and risks creating massive social instability. The AI era requires a strategic partnership between the state, labor, and technology.
And finally, this section addresses sustainable population policies, emphasizing this balancing act that's necessary for the nation's long-term health.
The source emphasizes that balance is paramount because the geopolitical reality presents these dual risks. On one hand, rapid, uncontrolled overpopulation strains ecosystems and resource consumption, which damages nature, one of the other five diamonds of nations, making your currency harder to sustain. But on the other hand, rapid underpopulation and decline, as we discussed with aging societies, weakens economies, cultural vitality, and the nation's strategic resilience.
So what does the source define as sustainability in this complex context?
Sustainable development, the source argues, must explicitly integrate demographic planning with environmental stewardship. It's not about maximizing the quantity of people at any cost. It's about optimizing the quality, the health, the skills, the productivity of your population currency in harmony with the planet's capacity. The ultimate goal is to maintain the most robust and high-quality human capital you can, but within the constraints of ecological balance. So if we synthesize this entire philosophy and we return to that dramatic tone of the legend mindset, the source offers a very clear historical progression. If gold was the stable currency of empires and oil was the dynamic, volatile currency of the 20th century, then this text argues unequivocally that people are the sovereign currency of the 21st century. It is the ultimate, dynamic, and appreciating asset if it's managed correctly.
That reframing just changes the entire calculus of state wealth and policymaking. The new balance sheet of a nation, then, should reflect not just GDP or debt, those temporary snapshots of material wealth, but the health, the skills, the creativity, and the cohesion of its population. These are the long-term fundamentals that guarantee enduring strength.
Which means every strategic choice, from building a new university to implementing a complex health policy, has to be viewed as a high-stakes fiscal transaction. Are we making a deposit that will compound over time, or are we making a withdrawal that depletes our future potential?
So what does this all mean in tangible terms? The source defines every child enrolled in a high-quality school, every worker in a dignified job, and every elder in secure care as a tangible, high-yield deposit in the national treasury. These are the elements that determine the true value and the long-term potential of the state, far exceeding any temporary trade surplus.
Ultimately, the most prosperous nations of the future will not necessarily be the ones with the largest armies or the richest minds. They will be the ones that best understand, invest in, empower, and unite their people. A government's greatest act of stewardship is ensuring its population currency appreciates over time, providing that enduring legacy the author speaks of.
Population, when wisely cultivated, is the ultimate form of national wealth, and according to this deep dive into the legend mind, it's the only currency that appreciates exponentially with care. As you look at your own professional journey, your own career arc, what active investment are you making in your own human capital today, preparing it for the currency demands of the AI-driven future? We encourage you to explore that question further, but we thank you for joining us for this deep dive.